She had heard it all. Every joke, every whisper, every name she was never meant to hear. The building still smelled of lemon polish and old printer ink. A fine mist covered the windows of the 34th floor, casting a pale silver over the conference room. Morning buzz hadn't begun yet. Phones still slept. Elevators hummed like distant engines. Clarice moved through the silence like it belonged to her. Her steps were soft, deliberate. The sleeves of her grey uniform brushed gently against her wrists. She adjusted a chair by an inch, picked up a crumpled napkin, left from some late-night meeting. Her eyes paused just for a second on the skyline, then she turned back into the quiet. No one noticed her. They never did. Except today. Today someone would look at her and not know what to say, because this morning the woman with the mop was going to take her seat at the table, and the room, once so sure of itself, would finally forget how to breathe. Clarice always arrived before the city woke. She liked the stillness, the unclaimed air of dawn in Manhattan. Streets still wet from overnight rain reflected the glint of street lamps like mirrors shattered on asphalt. The building on West 49th Street, all glass and ambition, loomed in silence as she swiped her badge and entered. Inside, it was the same rhythm. Lights flickered awake. Elevators pinged in idle anticipation. The scent of industrial cleaner hung in the air, hers carefully measured each morning. She tied her hair into a low knot, pulled on her gloves, and began the work that no one saw. Clarice didn't hum. She didn't sigh. Her silence wasn't just habit, it was armor. Years had taught her that speaking too much, standing too straight, or moving too boldly only brought eyes. The kind that lingered too long or dismissed too quickly. So she faded herself into the walls, into the linoleum, into the quiet hum of the building's breath. The 12th floor had the worst coffee spills. The 22nd always left conference rooms in disarray, but the 34th floor was different, reserved for the board. Untouched most days, like a chapel behind velvet rope. She treated it with reverence, chairs aligned with geometric precision, notepads centered, water bottles unsealed just so. No one ever thanked her, except Paul. Paul from maintenance, a wiry man with calloused hands and eyes that still softened when he saw her. He always brought her a second coffee on Wednesdays, told her jokes that rarely landed, but always made her smile. Another day in paradise, he'd said that morning, nodding toward the skyline. She gave him a smirk and kept walking. That was the whole exchange. But in Clarice's world, it was enough to feel seen. Down on the mezzanine level, she paused at the small framed photo outside the HR office. A woman, white late 50s, pearls and a permanent smile, stood flanked by company founders. "Diversity is our strength," read the plaque. Clarice adjusted her glove and turned away. She was 49. No husband, no children. Life had carved its own path through her. She hadn't followed the script, or maybe the script had never been written with her in mind. Still, she had read. She had studied. Every night after shifts, she poured herself into books, finance, ethics, leadership, her silent rebellion against the place the world kept assigning her. She never asked to be anything but left in peace. But peace rarely comes to women who don't fit the mold. At 7:42 a.m. she entered the 34th floor. The glass conference room shimmered with condensation. She cleaned it same as always. And as she placed the final pen beside the final notepad, she caught a reflection in the glass. A young woman, mid-20s, blonde ponytail, heels too high for comfort, entered the floor giggling. Clarice recognized her, one of the newer analysts, the kind who walked fast, talked louder, and never held the elevator door. The girl didn't see Clarice. Or maybe she did and chose not to. She leaned over to another junior associate and whispered, loud enough to echo, "I swear that cleaning lady smells like furniture polish and trauma." Laughter. A short, cruel chorus. Clarice didn't flinch. She didn't turn. She finished aligning the pen, stood up slowly, and walked past them without a sound. Her silence again, her shield. But something cracked. Just a hairline fracture in the surface. A tremor too quiet to be seen. Downstairs, Paul was fixing a fuse box. She didn't mention the girl, didn't say a word. She went home early that day, not because of the comment, but because tomorrow she wouldn't be cleaning the conference room. Tomorrow she'd be sitting in it. And the air, once so thick with assumed hierarchy, would start to feel different. The next morning came with grey skies and the promise of rain. Manhattan pulsed beneath clouds heavy with unspoken things. The air felt denser, the kind that clung to skin and memory. Inside the building, umbrellas dripped silently in corners, and elevators moved slower as if weighed down by the weather or something else. Ivy had arrived late, again. She breezed past security with her iced coffee and phone clutched between sculpted nails, the kind of woman who never felt rushed because the world always made time for her. Her hair was still damp from a rushed blow-dry, strands curling at the edges. Her stilettos clicked with a practiced confidence as she stepped into the elevator with two colleagues, both men, both junior, enough to laugh at everything she said. She didn't see Clarice standing near the back corner, or perhaps she saw her the way one sees a coat rack or a mop. Object, not presence. "Did you see the mop queen yesterday?" Ivy said, lips curving. "I swear she was arranging pens like she was designing the next Apple product." The men chuckled. One of them mimicked her. "Maybe she's working on her pitch deck, Sanitation Inc., a startup revolutionizing trash." Laughter filled the small space, bouncing off mirrored walls. Clarice remained still. She didn't look up, didn't speak. The silence she carried was not one of shame, but of choice. Ivy stepped out on the 32nd floor, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the woman who remained behind. Clarice waited until the doors closed. Then, slowly, she exhaled. It wasn't anger she felt. It was something deeper, older. The ache of recognition. Of knowing exactly where one stood in someone else's narrative, and knowing that the story was wrong. At 9 a.m. sharp, the message went out. "Board meeting, 11 a.m., 34th floor, mandatory attendance." A ripple moved through the office. Board meetings weren't routine, they were rare, disruptive, and whispered about like weather warnings. The usual board members were known quantities, grey suits, predictable smiles. But today's meeting had been called by someone else. Someone new. Clarice spent the next hour on the mezzanine level, not cleaning, waiting. At 10:56, she walked to the elevator, not with cleaning supplies, not in uniform. She wore a navy blue suit, pressed, elegant, simple earrings, low heels. Her hair pulled back with quiet strength. She held no purse, no coffee, no clipboard, only her ID badge, now updated. One word added beneath her name: board member. When the elevator opened on the 34th floor, a hush followed her. Ivy was already in the room, seated beside the CFO, legs crossed, phone face down but never far. She didn't see Clarice enter at first. The others didn't either, until Clarice reached the head of the table. She didn't sit yet. She placed a folder down slowly, her fingers brushing the edge. Then she looked up, directly at Ivy. The silence was electric. Ivy's expression shifted in real time. Confusion, realization, then something harder to name. Clarice took her seat, calm, unhurried, like she belonged, because she did. Across the table, Ivy's throat moved in a shallow swallow, the kind you make when your mouth forgets how to form words. The meeting began. The CFO welcomed everyone, then deferred to Clarice. "As many of you know," he said, "our board has expanded. We're proud to welcome Clarice Monroe, who brings a unique perspective grounded in decades of institutional knowledge, financial training, and community engagement." Clarice gave a small nod, no smile. Her hands rested still over the folder. "I'm not here to be thanked," she began. "I'm here because people like me were never supposed to be here." She didn't look at Ivy. She didn't need to. "I've spent 26 years walking these halls. I know every corner of this building, every crack in the foundation. I know what gets cleaned and what gets ignored." No one moved. "I've seen which voices get heard and which ones echo into silence." She let the pause hang there, a silence that for once others had to carry. And Ivy, once the loudest in the room, couldn't find a single word to speak. For the first time in the building's history, the seat at the head of the table did not feel ornamental. It felt earned and heavy. Clarice sat with her back straight, fingers laced gently, eyes scanning the room. not with suspicion but with an awareness honed over years of being overlooked. No one interrupted her. The usual voices, confident, deep, practiced, remained quiet. The room recalibrated itself around her presence. "I won't be here long," she said. "Not because I don't want to, but because people like me rarely stay where they're not expected to be." The boardroom held its breath. "But while I'm here, I'll speak and I'll listen. Especially to the ones no one else listens to." She opened her folder and began to read. Financial inconsistencies in janitorial contracts, underpaid third-party workers, discriminatory promotion practices, all facts she had gathered over the years. Not as a board member, as a woman with ears open and eyes unblinking. "I've cleaned your offices. I've stood outside your meetings. I know the budgets you claim can't stretch to raise wages. I know which departments you cut first." Some board members shifted in their seats. Others avoided her eyes. But Ivy watched, frozen, caught between disbelief and dawning clarity. She remembered the joke from the elevator, the way Clarice had walked out, silent, the moment that now rewound and played in her mind in a new light. Clarice continued, "This company claims to stand for equity, but equity isn't a plaque on a wall, it's a seat at the table, and not just for show." She turned to the CFO. "I'd like to review every promotion decision from the last 5 years. Names redacted. I'll be looking for patterns." He nodded, no resistance. Then she turned to Ivy. Not directly, but close enough that it was unmistakable. "I also want to launch a mentorship initiative, focused on junior staff, all of them, not just the ones who went to the right schools." Ivy's voice caught in her throat. She wanted to object, to speak, to justify something she couldn't name. But the room didn't belong to her anymore. Clarice ended the meeting with no flourish, no grand finale. Just a simple line. "Leadership isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who listens the longest." As the boardroom emptied, Ivy remained seated. Her phone buzzed, a meeting reminder. She didn't move. Clarice gathered her folder and walked past her without a glance. Not out of malice, but because some things don't require acknowledgement. Downstairs in the lobby, Paul stood with a tool belt slung low on his hips. He saw her, really saw her, and gave a quiet nod. Clarice smiled. For the first time that day, she stepped outside into the rain. No umbrella, just the kind of stillness that follows a storm. She didn't need the building to validate her anymore. She had taken her seat, and now others would follow. The rain softened into a mist by mid-afternoon, washing the city's edges into something almost gentle. Clarice returned home on foot, coat collar turned up, briefcase in hand, not the plastic bag she once carried, but real leather now, worn and honest. Her apartment in Harlem was small, sun-starved in the winter, but it held her history like a trusted friend. She sat by the window, watching the drops streak down the glass, remembering the other windows she had once cleaned, windows that showed wealth like paintings in a gallery, always out of reach. There had been a time when she lived in a shelter, twice in fact. The first was after her mother passed when Clarice was just 17. No diploma, no savings, just grief and a city that didn't wait for anyone. She remembered holding her mother's shoes for the last time, worn soles, flattened at the heels, before she gave them away to another woman who needed them more. She got her GED in a basement classroom lit by flickering fluorescence, worked overnight shifts mopping floors no one dared walk barefoot on. She read textbooks from second-hand stores, kept a dictionary on her nightstand, and wrote out definitions like prayers. At 29, she took a bookkeeping job at a community center, part-time, cash under the table. A pastor there saw her gift with numbers and gave her a used laptop. That was the start. She took free online courses in finance, accounting, corporate ethics. She printed PDFs and studied them on the subway, sitting beside suits who wouldn't meet her eye. But it wasn't just about money. Clarice studied people, watched how executives talked, how they moved. She saw how power whispered rather than shouted, how the real decisions happened in doorways and elevator lobbies. Every promotion she didn't get made her sharper. Every slight, every dear or sweetheart hurled in place of her name hardened her understanding. By the time the board seat opened, reserved for community representation under new corporate guidelines, Clarice was ready, not just on paper, but in the quiet, relentless way that only those who've been underestimated can prepare. She hadn't planned to speak much during her first meeting. But then Ivy spoke first, not with words but with her face, that flicker of disbelief, that unmasked resistance. And Clarice knew silence wouldn't serve her anymore. That night, she lay in bed without sleeping, eyes on the ceiling fan. She thought of her mother, of the way she used to sing while cleaning strangers' houses. A soft alto, always half a melody. She remembered once asking her why she sang so much. "Because if they won't see me," her mother had said, "I want heaven to hear me." Clarice hadn't sung in years, but that night she hummed, just a little, a tune her mother once sang while scrubbing a white marble floor that gleamed like judgment. In the morning, Clarice arrived early again, not to clean, but to walk. She moved through the building the same way she always had, past reception, past the glass elevator, past the HR plaque that still claimed diversity as a strength. She paused by the janitorial break room. One of the newer staff, a girl barely 20, looked up in confusion. "You okay?" the girl asked, seeing Clarice in her suit. Clarice nodded, then stepped in. She handed the girl a manila envelope. "These are applications for the new staff development program," she said. "Starts next quarter. You should apply." The girl blinked. "Wait. You're running it?" Clarice smiled. "We all are." She left before the girl could say more. Upstairs, Ivy stood in the corridor, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp with manufactured urgency. Clarice walked past her. Ivy turned, momentarily flustered, like she wanted to say something, an apology, a deflection, a plea, but no words formed. Clarice didn't slow. Some reckonings don't need confrontation. Some truths, once spoken, don't require echo. The third board meeting came faster than expected, less ceremonial, more decisive. Clarice arrived early again, this time not out of habit but purpose. She reviewed reports, scribbled notes in the margins, and drank her coffee black the way her mother had taught her. No sugar, no illusions. Across the table, Ivy sat with her usual posture, legs crossed, shoulders slightly forward, lips parted as if ready to speak but unsure when or how. Her face, once effortlessly composed, now flickered with uncertainty. Her laugh had grown quieter. Her presence more cautious. Clarice noticed. She noticed everything. The board chair, an aging executive with liver spots and a polished tie, began the meeting. As he spoke, Ivy glanced once, just once, across the table. Her eyes met Clarice's. What she saw wasn't bitterness. It wasn't triumph either. It was steadiness, a presence rooted too deep to be shaken. Clarice did not smile, but her stillness spoke. During a presentation on staffing allocations, Ivy finally raised her hand. She spoke clearly, offered a suggestion, small but thoughtful, not performative. Clarice listened, then nodded once. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness, not closure, just the quiet beginning of something new. After the meeting, Ivy lingered. Clarice gathered her notes slowly. As she stood, Ivy approached. "Ms. Monroe," she began. The words stumbled. I just wanted to say You don't have to," Clarice interrupted gently. Ivy hesitated, eyes lowering. "But you do have to listen," Clarice added, "especially when it's not comfortable." A pause. Ivy nodded. "I will." Clarice met her gaze for a long moment. Not cold, not warm, just true. Then she left the room. Downstairs, she took the service elevator. Not out of shame, but memory. Each floor it passed carried a ghost, old versions of herself that once mopped, wiped, bent, endured. In the lobby, Paul was changing a light bulb near the revolving doors. He smiled when he saw her. "You looked like you belonged up there," he said. Clarice tilted her head. "That's because I do." Outside, the city was loud, unrelenting. Clarice stepped into it with quiet certainty. Her presence was no longer invisible, but it was still measured, still intentional. She knew who she was. She always had. The world had simply caught up. In some rooms, silence speaks louder than words, and in others it takes just one presence to shift the weight of the entire table. Clarice never needed to raise her voice, because power isn't volume, it's memory, it's resilience. It's knowing that every insult, every dismissive glance, every moment spent on the margins was quietly adding weight to a voice no one expected to carry authority. She wasn't supposed to sit there at the head of that table. She wasn't meant to rewrite the tone of the room or challenge the hierarchy that mistook proximity for intelligence. But still, she arrived. And when she did, she didn't come for revenge. She came with facts, with presence, with truth. There are many like Clarice, people who've listened longer than they've spoken, people who've been mocked by those who forget their own beginnings, people underestimated by systems designed to overlook them, and yet they endure, they learn, and one day when the world isn't looking, they lead. The boardroom didn't get quieter because Clarice walked in. It got quieter because, for the first time, it had something real to hear. The world is still full of Clarices, watching, waiting, ready, and when they speak, the room will listen. If this story spoke to something inside you, stay close. There are more voices like hers, maybe even yours, waiting to be heard.